It was supposed to be an ordinary night. Another quiet shift on the road, just me, my truck, and the endless miles of highway. I've been a truck driver for over 30 years, and I've seen my fair share of weird things out there, but nothing prepared me for what happened that night. I didn't believe in ghosts or the supernatural. Hell, I barely believed in anything at all. But whatever I saw, whatever I experienced, it changed everything. I still don't sleep right because of it. I was on my last delivery, the one that would cap off my career before retirement. It was late, around midnight, and I was driving through some back road outside of Boise, heading towards Salt Lake City. The radio was playing static, normal for these parts, where stations fade in and out depending on where you are. The night was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like something's wrong, even when everything looks fine. I remember glancing at the clock on the dashboard. 12:47 a.m. I was tired, but not enough to stop. That's when it happened. The radio, which had been static for the past hour, crackled to life. At first I thought it was just another station cutting in, but then I heard it. Her voice. Soft, almost like a whisper, but unmistakable. Frank? It was my wife, Martha. Except it couldn't be, because Martha's been dead for 3 years. I froze, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than I realized. Frank, can you hear me? Her voice was clearer now, like she was sitting right next to me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt this overwhelming wave of disbelief. I wanted to pull over, but my body wouldn't let me. I was glued to the seat, eyes straight ahead, too scared to look at the passenger seat where she always used to sit. Martha? I whispered, feeling like a goddamn fool. But the voice didn't stop. It was her. I knew it. The way she said my name, the tone, it was her. Frank, you need to turn around, she said, her voice now more urgent. Don't go to Salt Lake, please, turn back. Something's waiting for you. I'll admit at that moment I was more confused than scared. The rational part of my brain told me it was just my mind playing tricks. Long hours, exhaustion, nothing more. But deep down I felt it. That chill that runs up your spine when you know you're not alone. I didn't respond. What could I say? I just kept driving, the headlights illuminating the dark road ahead. But the voice kept going, getting more desperate. Frank, please. You don't know what's out there. It's not safe. Turn around before it's too late. That's when I noticed it. The road, which had been empty, suddenly felt different. Like the darkness had swallowed everything, even the air around me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. My knuckles were white, gripping the steering wheel, like it was the only thing keeping me grounded in reality. I wanted to listen to her. God, I wanted to, but I didn't. And that was the biggest mistake I ever made. I kept driving. The voice faded into static again, but the tension in the air was thick, like the night had swallowed every ounce of normalcy. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself it wasn't real. Maybe I was just overtired, hallucinating from the hours on the road. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Martha's voice, her voice, was too real, too clear, for it to just be my imagination. The highway stretched out in front of me, endless and empty. It felt like I was driving through a void, the road blending into the darkness beyond the reach of my headlights. I turned the radio off, hoping the silence would help me calm down, but it didn't. My mind was racing, replaying her words over and over again. Turn back before it's too late. What the hell did that mean? The longer I drove, the more uneasy I felt. It was like the truck didn't want to go any further, like the whole damn thing was fighting against me. The engine started making this low, groaning sound, and the steering wheel felt heavier in my hands. Every instinct screamed at me to stop. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was too stubborn, too set on finishing the job and putting this all behind me. That's when I saw it. Movement in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just the shadows playing tricks on me. The kind of thing you see out of the corner of your eye when you're tired. But then it happened again, clearer this time. Something was in the back of the truck. I could feel it. I glanced over my shoulder, even though I knew there was no way I'd see anything from inside the cab. But the feeling was there. Stronger now. Like I wasn't alone. Like something had crept into the back when I wasn't paying attention. My heart started to pound. Sweat formed on my brow, and I could feel the hairs on my arms standing up. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe I hadn't secured the load properly and something had shifted. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't just some cargo moving around. This was something else. Then the radio crackled again, bursting into life. But this time it wasn't Martha's voice. It was something darker, more sinister. Low, guttural sounds, like a growl mixed with static. The words were garbled, but I could make out one thing. Shh, he's coming. I slammed my foot on the brake, skidding to a stop in the middle of the empty road. My breathing was heavy, my pulse racing. The truck groaned to a halt, and for a second, there was nothing but silence. But that silence didn't last long. From the back of the truck, I heard it. Something scraping against the metal walls. Slow at first, like claws dragging across steel. My blood turned to ice as the sound grew louder, closer, as if whatever was in the back was trying to get out. I grabbed the door handle, ready to jump out and run, but I froze. Fear paralyzed me. The realization hit me hard. There was nowhere to run. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, whatever was back there had me trapped. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the scraping stopped. The radio crackled one last time, and Martha's voice returned. "It's too late, Frank." A cold dread settled in my chest. Whatever was back there, it was waiting for me, and I had no idea how to escape. I sat there, frozen in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The truck was still, the road eerily quiet. But I knew something was back there. The scraping sound, that growl on the radio, it wasn't my imagination. I wasn't losing it. This was real. And whatever was in the back of my truck was something I couldn't explain. I stared at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something crawl out of the darkness. Nothing. Just the faint outline of the trailer behind me, barely visible in the dim glow of the taillights. But the feeling was there, heavy and oppressive, like the air itself was watching me. My hands were slick with sweat, and I could feel my pulse in my throat, thudding away like a warning drum. I reached for the radio again, hesitating before turning the dial. Static. Then silence. Nothing. I almost sighed in relief, but then I heard it. A faint tapping. It was coming from the back. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, like something was testing the walls of the trailer. My breath hitched, and I felt that deep, primal fear settle in my gut. I had to do something. Sitting there wasn't an option. I couldn't just wait for whatever was back there to make the first move. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I grabbed the flashlight I kept under the seat, opened the door, and stepped out into the night. The air was cold, biting against my skin, but it wasn't the chill that made me shiver. It was the silence, the kind that felt unnatural, like the world had paused, waiting to see what would happen next. I stood there for a moment, listening. Nothing but the soft hum of the truck's engine cooling down. I made my way toward the back of the trailer, each step heavier than the last. My flashlight beam wavered in my trembling hand, cutting through the darkness. When I reached the back, I paused. The door loomed in front of me, massive and still. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to see what was inside, but I couldn't leave it closed either. I needed to know. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe there was nothing in there at all. Maybe, I heard a whisper. "Frank?" My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't coming from the radio this time. It was right behind me. I spun around, shining the flashlight in all directions. Nothing. Just the empty road, stretching out into the night. But the voice, it was so clear, so close. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was standing right next to me. I swallowed hard and turned back to the trailer. Slowly I reached for the handle, my fingers trembling. The metal was ice cold beneath my touch. I hesitated, heart pounding in my ears. Then with a deep breath, I yanked the door open. The beam of my flashlight swept across the inside of the trailer. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Just boxes, crates, the usual cargo I'd been hauling for years. But then I saw it. In the far corner, something was moving. A shadow shifted, too fast for me to fully comprehend, like it was slipping out of sight the moment the light touched it. And then it spoke again. "You should have listened to me, Frank." I stumbled back, my legs nearly giving out beneath me. The flashlight slipped from my hand and clattered to the ground, casting erratic shadows across the road. I didn't wait to see what was next. I slammed the trailer door shut and ran back to the cab, my breath coming in ragged gasps. As I threw myself into the driver's seat and locked the doors, the radio crackled to life one more time. Martha's voice, soft but filled with sorrow, echoed through the static. "It's too late, Frank. You're already too far gone." And in that moment, I knew whatever was in the back of my truck wasn't done with me. Not by a long shot. I slammed the truck door behind me, locking it instinctively, as though it would somehow keep whatever was back there out. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key into the ignition. But when the engine roared back to life, it was like I could finally breathe again. For a second, I thought about just ditching the trailer right there on the road, leaving everything behind. But that voice, Martha's voice, kept repeating in my head. "It's too late, Frank." Too late for what? I forced myself to start driving again. I didn't know where I was going, just away. But every mile felt wrong, like I was driving deeper into something I couldn't escape. The headlights cut through the night, but the darkness around me seemed thicker now, almost alive. The road stretched out ahead, straight and narrow, but there was a heaviness in the air, something oppressive pressing down on me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something crawling out of the back of the trailer, but it was just empty darkness. I tried to shake it off, to focus on the road, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. It was like something was right behind me, lurking just out of sight. Then the radio crackled again. "Frank." Her voice. Soft. Calm. Too calm. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to block it out, but her voice grew louder, filling the cab like she was sitting right next to me. My heart pounded in my chest. "Martha, please. What do you want from me?" I muttered, barely able to believe I was talking to her voice. But I couldn't stop myself. There was a long silence, and then she said something that chilled me to my core. "They won't let you leave, Frank. Not now, not with that." I glanced into the rearview mirror again, the dread building in my stomach. My headlights illuminated nothing but the road ahead, but her words hung in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the cargo I was hauling. Something I didn't understand. I wanted to stop, to pull over and abandon the trailer, but my hands wouldn't leave the wheel. It was like I was trapped in this drive, a passenger in my own body. The truck groaned as it barreled down the highway, but I wasn't in control anymore. The road stretched on endlessly, the miles blurring together, and with every minute, the feeling of dread grew stronger. Then, without warning, the headlights flickered. My heart skipped a beat. They flickered again. I slammed my foot on the brake, the truck screeching to a halt in the middle of the road. The headlights went out completely, plunging everything into darkness. My breathing came in shallow gasps as I fumbled for the flashlight, but before I could grab it, I heard something. From the back of the trailer. The scraping. It was louder this time. More frantic, like whatever was back there was trying to get out. My pulse raced, and I gripped the wheel tighter, paralyzed by fear. The sound of metal creaking echoed through the night, followed by a low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. And then, it happened. A loud bang against the trailer door. I flinched, staring into the darkness ahead, my heart hammering in my chest. The radio crackled, and her voice came through one more time. "Frank, it's time." The banging continued, growing louder and more insistent, shaking the truck. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I was trapped in the driver's seat, watching the rearview mirror as if it held all the answers. The trailer rocked with each thud, whatever was inside getting more desperate. And then, silence. Complete and utter silence. I held my breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. The darkness seemed to press in around me, suffocating. And then, just as I thought it was over, the door to the trailer began to creak open. Slowly, inch by inch. I didn't dare turn around, but in the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Something dark and twisted crawling out of the back of the truck. It was coming for me, and there was nowhere left to run. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't piece together. All I could hear was the creaking of the trailer door behind me. That slow, agonizing sound of metal bending, like it was being forced open by something far too strong, far too unnatural. My breath was shallow, chest tight, as I stared straight ahead, refusing to look back. But I didn't have to. I could feel it. Whatever was back there was close. The air in the cab grew colder, thick with a presence that I couldn't explain, but it was there, heavy and suffocating. My skin crawled with the awareness of something watching me, approaching me. The door creaked fully open. I squeezed the steering wheel, my knuckles white, every fiber of my being screaming for me to run. But where? There was nowhere to go. I was trapped in this truck, trapped in this nightmare that had somehow become real. And then I heard it. A wet, dragging sound, like something slick moving across the ground, slowly, deliberately. The kind of sound that makes your stomach turn and your heart stop. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, and for the briefest moment, I saw something. Just a glimpse, barely illuminated by the faint light of the dashboard. It was a shape, low to the ground, twisted, with limbs that didn't make sense. It was crawling toward the cab, pulling itself closer with unnatural, jerky movements. I couldn't make out its face, if it even had a face, but I could see enough to know this wasn't human. This was something else, something wrong. My mouth went dry. I wanted to scream, to throw open the door and run into the night, but my body refused to cooperate. The radio crackled again, and I braced myself for Martha's voice, but this time, it wasn't her. It was him. A voice I didn't recognize, but deep and guttural, full of malice. "You've come too far, Frank." My heart skipped. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, shaking my head as if denying it would change anything. "No," I whispered to myself. "No, no, no." But the voice continued, mocking, cruel. "You can't run from this. It's too late. You're ours now." I heard the wet scraping getting closer, that sickening noise of whatever was dragging itself toward me. My body trembled, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. My eyes darted back to the rearview mirror, but the shape was gone. My pulse spiked. Where did it go? Before I could process, the entire truck rocked violently, like something had slammed into the side. I jolted forward, hitting the steering wheel with my chest, gasping for air. The truck groaned, metal twisting and screeching under pressure. I looked out the window, but the night was thick and impenetrable. Nothing but darkness stretched out around me, and yet I knew something was out there. Something massive. Something more than just the thing that had crawled from the trailer. I needed to move. Now. With shaking hands, I reached for the door handle, throwing it open. The freezing night air hit me like a wall, but it wasn't enough to snap me out of the fear. I stumbled out, my legs barely cooperating, heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst. But as soon as I was out of the truck, I felt it. The presence. Stronger now. Closer. The scraping started again. Louder. Faster. I turned around and there it was, crawling from under the trailer. Its twisted limbs reached for me, its body contorting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. And the stench, it was overwhelming, like something rotten, something long dead but still alive, still moving. I backed away, my breath coming in short, desperate gasps. But it was no use. The thing was gaining on me, its movements frantic now, almost eager. I could hear its breaths, wet and labored, like it was excited, like it was hungry. I tripped, falling backward onto the pavement, my hands scraping against the rough ground. I scrambled to get up, but before I could, I felt it. Cold fingers, if you could even call them that, wrapped around my ankle. The grip was like ice, paralyzing me with fear. I kicked out, trying to free myself, but it was no use. It dragged me closer. And then in the darkness, I saw it. Its face, twisted and hollow, its eyes black pits of nothingness, staring into my soul. A mouth too wide, filled with teeth that were too long, too sharp. It opened its maw, a sound escaping it that was more of a guttural growl than a scream. "Frank," it hissed, and I knew in that moment, this was it. There was no escape, no running, no surviving. I was already dead. It was a night like any other. The kind of night that's become routine after decades on the road. Just me, the hum of the engine, and the dark stretch of highway ahead. I was hauling supplies to a small town somewhere deep in Colorado. The kind of place where folks say the stars shine brighter because there's nothing around for miles. Normally I'd find peace in the isolation, but that night, something felt off. It started out simple enough. Empty road, no other cars, just the headlights slicing through the pitch-black night. But then, out of nowhere, I saw it. Or rather, her. A figure standing on the side of the road, barely visible in the dim light, motioning for help. My first thought was that someone had broken down. Happens all the time out here. People don't realize how quickly the wilderness can turn on you. So I slowed down, squinting through the windshield, trying to make out her face. But as I got closer, the figure vanished. 1 second she was there, and the next, she was gone. Just like that. I slammed on the brakes, heart racing, adrenaline shooting through my veins. I scanned the side of the road, my headlights sweeping the area. Nothing. No car, no person, no sign anyone had ever been there. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tighter than I probably needed to. It had to be a trick of the light, or maybe I was just tired. God knows I've pulled too many all-nighters, and sleep deprivation does weird things to the mind. I convinced myself it was nothing and started driving again, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every shadow seemed to creep closer. Every flicker of light felt wrong. When I pulled into the truck stop a couple hours later, I couldn't shake the image of that figure from my mind. I mentioned it to another driver as we stood by the pumps, filling our tanks in silence. He barely looked at me, just muttered something under his breath and walked away. His reaction was strange, but I didn't push it. Maybe I was just being paranoid. As I went inside the station, the radio was playing some old, forgotten tune. A song about lost souls on the highway. The kind of thing that usually wouldn't get to me. But that night, it hit different. It was like a warning, like the universe was trying to tell me something. Something I didn't want to hear. I tried to shrug it off, but as I climbed back into my truck, I could still feel her eyes on me. That figure, whatever she was, hadn't just disappeared. She was still there, lurking somewhere in the dark, waiting. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone out there on the road. Not in the way I usually did. That night, when I finally pulled over to sleep, I dreamed of her. The figure standing just outside my window, watching, silent, her face hidden in the shadows. And even though I knew it was a dream, it didn't feel like one. It felt like something else, something real, something I couldn't escape. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept replaying the moment in my head, how she'd just vanished. I had seen her. I was sure of it. But the more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. I started asking around. Figured, maybe some of the other guys had seen something similar on that stretch of road. But every time I brought it up, the conversation went cold. People would either laugh it off, change the subject, or just straight up walk away. Then, one night at a diner, I met Paul. Old-timer, been driving these roads longer than I've been alive. He was one of the few who didn't dismiss my story right away. When I mentioned the figure, he stopped mid-bite, eyes narrowing. I could tell he knew something. You saw her too, huh? He finally said, voice low, like he didn't want anyone else to hear. My stomach twisted. What do you mean? Her? Paul leaned in, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. You ain't the first one to see her, won't be the last either. Some call her a ghost, others say she's worse than that. He paused, eyes flicking toward the window as if she might be out there, watching. I saw her once, years ago, just like you. Thought she needed help, slowed down. But before I could stop, she was gone. Never did see her face. Who is she? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Her name was Clara Wilson, Paul said. Got hit by a truck back in the 70s, right on that stretch of road. Car broke down. She was out there trying to flag someone down for help. Nobody ever stopped, except the truck that hit her. My blood ran cold. Jesus, that's horrible. Yeah, Paul muttered, picking at his food but not eating anymore. And now they say she's still out there, stuck or something. I don't know what it is exactly, but anyone who sees her, anyone who stops to help her, they don't come back the same. What do you mean? Paul didn't answer right away. He just stared out the window at the dark highway beyond, as if seeing something I couldn't. You ever hear about the disappearances on that road? I nodded. Everyone had. It was one of those rumors you picked up if you spent enough time on the highway. Drivers who vanished without a trace, trucks found abandoned, still running, doors wide open but no sign of the driver. Most people say it's accidents, bandits, even wild animals. But the ones who know. Paul leaned closer, voice dropping to barely a whisper. They say it's her, that she waits by the road and when someone stops, she takes them. For what, I don't know. Maybe she's still looking for someone to save her, or maybe she's just angry no one did. I sat there trying to take it all in. It sounded insane. It was insane. But something about the way Paul spoke, it felt too real to ignore. "Best advice I can give you," Paul continued, pushing his plate away. "Don't stop. Ever. No matter what you see out there." I nodded, but his words left me uneasy. I had already stopped once, and now that I knew the story, now that I knew her name, it felt like she wouldn't let me go so easily. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, standing on the side of the road, arm raised, waiting. And no matter how much I told myself it was just a story, something deep inside me knew the truth. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next time I was out on that route, I couldn't help but feel my nerves prickling with every mile. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, that I was overthinking it, letting the story Paul told me get under my skin. But there was this feeling, a weight in the air, that I couldn't shake. It felt like something was watching me, waiting for me to make the wrong move. I hit that familiar stretch of road again, the one where I saw her, and my hands gripped the wheel tighter. My foot hovered over the brake. I didn't want to stop, but I couldn't help it. A part of me needed to see her again, needed to know if what I'd experienced was real or just a trick of my tired mind. And then, just like before, she was there. Standing on the side of the road, her silhouette illuminated by my headlights, one hand raised as if asking for help. This time, she didn't disappear right away. She stayed there, her form clearer, more solid, like she was daring me to keep driving. My heart pounded in my chest. I slowed down, but I didn't stop. I knew better now. The closer I got, the more I could see her. Dark hair hanging limp, clothes torn and dirtied, face pale and expressionless. Her eyes, though, they locked onto mine through the windshield, and I swear for a moment she smiled. A chill ran down my spine. I hit the gas, hard, but the second I sped up, the radio crackled, static. And then, through the distortion, I heard it. A voice. A low, broken whisper that barely made sense. I couldn't tell what it was saying, but it was enough to send a surge of panic through me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I glanced at the rearview mirror and froze. She was in the back seat. Just for a second, no more than a heartbeat, but I saw her. Sitting there, staring at me with those cold, empty eyes. My heart leaped into my throat, and I nearly lost control of the truck. By the time I looked back, she was gone. I drove faster, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My pulse thundered in my ears, and all I could think about was getting as far away from that place as possible. But the static didn't stop. The voice kept whispering, growing louder, more insistent, like it was trying to tell me something. I turned the radio off, but the sound kept going, as if it were coming from somewhere inside the cab, not from the speakers. I glanced in the mirror again, half expecting to see her staring back at me, but the back seat was empty. For now, the road stretched on, dark and endless, and every shadow seemed to move. Every flicker of light from the passing trees looked like her figure standing in the distance. My mind raced. Was she following me? Was she inside my truck? Or was it just my imagination? When I finally reached the next truck stop, I pulled in so fast I nearly missed the turn. I threw the truck in park and just sat there for a minute, catching my breath, trying to calm down. But that feeling, that gnawing sense of dread, didn't leave. I knew deep down that this wasn't over. She wasn't done with me yet, and the worst part, I wasn't sure I'd be able to resist stopping the next time I saw her. I couldn't get her out of my head. That woman on the road, her eyes boring into me through the windshield, her figure vanishing in the back seat. The fear had burrowed deep, making it impossible to shake off. Every time I closed my eyes, she was there, just waiting. I knew I had to do something, to figure out what the hell was going on. This wasn't just a trick of the mind. It felt too real, too deliberate. So the next time I had a break from the road, I drove into the nearest town, a quiet little place not too far from that haunted stretch of highway. The town's library was one of those small, forgotten buildings tucked away on a side street, dusty shelves and old records that probably hadn't been touched in years. Perfect for what I needed. I asked the librarian if there were any records of accidents on the highway. She gave me a curious look but didn't ask any questions, just pointed me toward the archives. I spent hours digging through old newspapers, squinting at faded articles about crashes and disappearances. There were plenty of accidents on that road, more than I expected. But then I found it, a single article from the 1970s. A woman named Clara Wilson. She died on that exact stretch of highway, hit by a truck while trying to flag someone down. The report said her car had broken down, and she'd been walking along the road, desperate for help. Sound familiar? My heart pounded as I read through the details. It was her. It had to be. Clara. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was the woman I'd seen, the one haunting me. The article mentioned that the truck driver who hit her had never been found. No witnesses, no closure, just a life cut short, left to linger. I dug deeper, searching for anything else I could find about her. More reports of drivers seeing a woman on the road, more disappearances. Some of the missing were never found. Others turned up days or even weeks later, dead in their trucks, looking like they'd been dead for much longer than they'd actually been gone. It didn't make any sense. None of it did. But what hit me the hardest was the pattern. Every single one of those drivers had one thing in common. They'd all stopped for her. They'd tried to help, and it had cost them their lives. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of what I'd learned pressing down on me. I wasn't imagining this. Clara was real, and she was dangerous. But why me? Why was she targeting me? I hadn't even stopped for her, not really. I found an old historian in town who knew a little more about the area. He was one of those folks who believed in all sorts of strange things, like spirits trapped in places of tragedy, unable to move on. He told me the road had a bad reputation, that people avoided it after dark. Too many souls lost there, he'd said, his voice low and grave. When I mentioned Clara, he nodded slowly, as if he'd heard her name before. He told me that spirits like hers, spirits tied to violent deaths, often seek something: justice, revenge, closure. But they rarely get it. And until they do, they don't stop. She's looking for something, he said, and if you keep going down that road, she'll find it in you. Those words stuck with me, echoing in my head as I drove away from town. I couldn't help but feel like I was being pulled back to that road, like I had unfinished business with Clara, and maybe I did. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to go back. I had to face her. But this time, I'd be ready. This time, I wouldn't be caught off guard. I just hoped I could survive whatever it was she wanted from me. I knew I couldn't run from this. Clara was haunting me, pulling me back to that road, like some invisible tether I couldn't break. No matter how much I wanted to just forget, to move on, I couldn't. There was something unfinished, something she needed, and I had to face it. So I went back. It was late, just after midnight, the perfect time for something like this. The road was as empty as ever. The only sound, the rumble of my truck and the faint whisper of the wind outside. My hands were gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. I drove slowly, scanning the sides of the road, waiting. The tension was unbearable. Every shadow seemed to move, every flicker of my headlights revealing something sinister. But for miles, there was nothing. Just the dark, winding road and the growing sense of dread in my gut. Then there she was. Standing at the exact same spot where I'd seen her before, Clara. This time she was clearer, more defined, no longer just a shadowy figure. I could see her pale face, her dark, hollow eyes fixed on me. She was wearing an old, tattered dress, her hair hanging limply around her face. She looked sad, desperate. I slowed down but didn't stop. My whole body was screaming at me to keep moving, to not give in, but I couldn't take my eyes off her. As I passed by, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and there she was again, sitting in the back seat just like before. But this time I didn't panic. "Clara," I whispered, gripping the steering wheel harder. "I know who you are. I know what happened to you." I don't know why I said it. Maybe I thought acknowledging her would make her go away, or maybe I just wanted her to understand that I wasn't a threat. But she didn't move, didn't respond. She just sat there, watching me with those dead eyes, as cold as the grave. The temperature inside the cab plummeted, my breath turning to mist in front of me. The radio crackled, then that same old song, "Lost Souls on the Highway," began playing again, as if the whole truck was possessed by her presence. I felt a pressure on my chest, like something was squeezing the life out of me, a cold hand wrapping around my heart. My vision blurred, the edges of my sight going dark. I couldn't breathe. "Please," I gasped, fighting to keep control. "What do you want?" She didn't answer, but I felt her. It was like she was inside my head, inside my mind, twisting my thoughts, filling them with images of her death. Her broken body lying in the road, her eyes wide and terrified as the truck bore down on her. I saw it all, felt her fear, her pain. She wanted justice, wanted someone to pay for what had been done to her. I slammed the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop on the deserted road. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned in my seat, staring directly at her, forcing myself to confront her fully. "I know what happened to you," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "I know you died here, and I know you're still stuck. But I'm not the one who did this to you." Her eyes flickered, like she was considering my words. The pressure on my chest eased slightly and the temperature in the truck began to rise, the song on the radio fading into static. "I can help you," I continued, desperation creeping into my voice. "But you need to let me go." For a moment, everything was still. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, her figure began to fade, dissolving into the darkness. But just before she disappeared completely, I heard her whisper, clear as day, in my ear. "Not yet." And then she was gone. I sat there in the middle of that road, gasping for air, trembling. I'd survived the encounter, but I knew this wasn't over. Clara wasn't finished with me, not by a long shot. Whatever she wanted, whatever justice or vengeance she sought, I was part of it now, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever truly escape. I've been on the road for hours, feeling the weight of the delivery hanging over me. Nevada's highways at night always have that eerie calm, but tonight, something felt off. My GPS beeped, showing a shortcut, a route I hadn't noticed before. It promised to shave off a couple of hours, and honestly, I was all for it. Less time on the road meant more sleep later. I've been doing this long enough to trust my gut, but this time, I ignored that little voice in the back of my mind. The road was quiet, no other cars, and the air had this heavy stillness to it. At first, it seemed normal, just another empty highway. But soon, I noticed something weird. The landscape, it wasn't changing. I could have sworn I'd passed the same rusted-out sign a couple of miles back. And those damn trees, they all looked exactly the same. I tried shaking it off, blaming the fatigue. Maybe I was just too tired. I turned up the radio, but it didn't help much. The road stretched on and on, the same flickering streetlights marking the way. And the night, it didn't seem like it was moving forward. I glanced at the clock. 2:13 a.m. I shrugged it off. 20 minutes later, I checked again. My heart skipped. No way. I must have misread it. But after another hour? Still 2:13. The pit in my stomach grew, but I kept driving. The GPS wasn't helping either, recalculating every few minutes, never settling on a clear path. It was like the road was looping back on itself, no matter how far I went. I pressed harder on the gas, hoping to outrun whatever strange thing was happening. That's when I felt it. This creeping sensation, like someone was watching me. As I kept driving, the headlights of the truck started to flicker. At first it was just a slight dimming, but then they began to blink and sync with the streetlights outside, the same damn lights that seemed to follow me for miles. My heart raced, but I kept my grip on the wheel tight, trying to convince myself that it was just an electrical issue. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Then, out of nowhere, the radio crackled to life. I hadn't touched it, hadn't even thought about turning it on. It jumped between stations, catching fragments of voices, music, static. One moment it was some old country tune, the next it was voices, distorted, whispering things I couldn't make out, and then I caught a phrase, "He never made it home." I slammed the dial, trying to turn it off, but the voices just kept coming. They talked about truckers who vanished, men like me, driving late at night down empty roads, never to be seen again. My breath caught in my throat. I glanced in the mirrors, expecting to see something, someone behind me. But the road was still empty. Suddenly, I saw headlights in the distance. Relief washed over me. Finally someone else. Another truck, maybe? But as I got closer, the lights faded, flickering like the road itself was swallowing them whole. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white, forcing myself to keep going. But the road, it was the same. Every few miles, I'd see that same rusted sign, the same broken streetlight. No matter how far I drove, I wasn't getting anywhere. I started to panic. The clock on the dashboard still blinked 2:13 a.m. over and over. My mind raced. Was I stuck in some kind of time loop? Was I losing it? Then came the banging. Soft at first, like something knocking around in the back of the truck. I ignored it at first, figuring it was just the usual stuff shifting around. But it got louder, more persistent, like fists pounding against the metal. I pulled over, heart racing, and jumped out to check. But when I opened the back of the truck, there was nothing. No signs of anything or anyone. As I stood there, alone on that empty road, I felt it again. That creeping sensation that I wasn't alone. Eyes watching me from somewhere out there in the dark. I turned back to the truck, breathing heavy, and gunned the engine. I didn't know what was happening, but I sure as hell wasn't sticking around to find out. The road felt darker now, heavier. The headlights barely cut through the night, like the shadows were closing in on me. I knew, deep down, that this wasn't just a bad stretch of highway. Something was wrong. After what felt like an eternity of driving, I saw something up ahead. A truck stop. Relief hit me like a punch to the gut. Finally, a chance to get off this damn road. I pulled in, the gravel crunching under the tires as I rolled to a stop in front of the diner. But as soon as I got a good look at the place, my heart sank. The building was abandoned, the windows dirty and cracked, the neon sign flickering weakly, like it hadn't seen power in years. I stepped out of the truck, my boots hitting the ground with an eerie echo. The air was thick, almost suffocating. I walked up to the door of the diner, pushing it open with a loud creak. Inside, it was a mess. Tables were flipped, chairs scattered like there had been a rush to leave. Plates of food sat half-eaten, now covered in dust and mold, like whoever had been here just disappeared. I walked through, my boots kicking up dust in the dim light. That's when I saw it, a stack of old newspapers piled up in the corner. The headlines screamed at me. Truckers vanish on desolate highway. Mystery surrounds disappearances on Nevada route. My stomach twisted. The dates on those papers were from years ago, but the descriptions, they matched everything I'd been seeing. I felt my chest tighten. Was I next? Was I part of this curse, or whatever the hell it was? The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. I looked over my shoulder and caught a glimpse of something, a shadow moving past the window. I rushed outside, but the lot was empty, just my truck sitting there, waiting. The silence was thick, oppressive. Then I saw it. Another truck parked at the far end of the lot. Its engine was still warm, the faint smell of diesel hanging in the air, but there was no sign of the driver. The truck's doors were wide open, like whoever was behind the wheel had just vanished into thin air. My pulse raced. I had to get out of here. Whatever was happening, it wasn't natural. As I turned to head back to my rig, I noticed something in the distance. Dark figures, moving slowly toward me from the horizon. They weren't people, not really. Their shapes were twisted, distorted, like shadows that didn't belong to anything solid. And they were getting closer. I bolted back to my truck, jumping inside and slamming the door shut. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, the engine roaring to life. The figures were almost at the edge of the lot now, moving in that unnatural, jerking way. I floored it, tires screeching as I tore out of the stop, the shadows shrinking in the rearview mirror. But as I sped down the road, heart pounding in my chest, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. The road ahead? It was the same. I was still trapped. There was no escape. I don't know how long I've been driving. It's like time doesn't exist out here anymore. The clock on the dashboard is stuck at 2:13 a.m. and the night won't end. My mind is slipping. I can feel it. The same stretch of road just keeps repeating. Same rusted signs, same flickering lights. No matter how far I go, I'm always right back where I started. The worst part? The shadows. They're not just in the corners of my eyes anymore. They're everywhere now. Moving alongside the truck, darting between the trees, sometimes even right there in the passenger seat when I glance over. I've stopped looking. The radio, though, that's new. It doesn't just spit out random static anymore. It's talking to me. Not in words exactly, but in whispers, and it knows my name. Sometimes it repeats things I've thought, like it's inside my head. Mark, you belong here, it hisses, over and over. You've always belonged here. I don't know how much longer I can take this. I think back to those newspapers in the diner, to the faces of the truckers who went missing. Am I one of them now? just another lost soul, trapped on this cursed stretch of road, doomed to drive it forever? But then it hits me. This isn't just some messed up road. It's alive. It's feeding off me, draining my energy, my will. Every mile feels heavier, like the truck itself is struggling to move forward, sinking into the asphalt. I hear voices now inside the cab. They're not human, and they're not friendly. Sometimes they call out names I don't know, and other times, they just laugh. The sound makes my skin crawl. The longer I drive, the more I start to see things. Other truckers, at least I think that's what they are. They're like ghosts, drifting along the edges of the road, their faces pale and blank, eyes hollow. Sometimes I think I see myself reflected in them, as if I'm slowly becoming one of them. I try to focus, try to stay grounded. But the road, it keeps shifting, changing. The signs point to places that don't exist. Nowhere, oblivion, the end. The words twist as I pass, like they're mocking me. I don't know what's real anymore. And then in the rearview mirror I see something that stops my heart. It's me, but not me. It's a twisted version of myself, staring back at me with a hollow, empty gaze. Its eyes are dark, voids where life should be. It grins, a sick, crooked smile that chills me to the core. My reflection is watching me, waiting. For what? I don't want to find out. I can't escape this. The road, it's not just a place. It's a trap, a nightmare, and I'm part of it now. There's no way out. The figures in the shadows know it, the radio knows it, and deep down I think I know it too. I'm not driving this truck anymore. The road is, and it's not gonna let me go. I was losing it. I could feel my grip on reality slipping, but I wasn't ready to give up. There had to be a way out. I thought back to the beginning, to the moment I turned onto this cursed road. There was something about a sign, something important. If I could just remember it, maybe I could break the cycle. The radio crackled to life again, but this time it wasn't whispers, it was counting down. 10, 9, 8. What the hell? I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. The road ahead was starting to warp, like the asphalt was twisting and curling, pulling me deeper into whatever nightmare I'd stumbled into. 7, 6. I floored the gas pedal, but the truck wasn't moving any faster. The road was stretching, getting longer, like it was mocking my desperation. 5, 4. Sweat dripped down my face as I scanned the sides of the road, looking for anything that could help. Then I saw it. Up ahead, a sign, rusted, barely readable, but I recognized it. It was the same one I passed when I first took the shortcut. End of the line. I hadn't paid attention to it before, but now it felt like a warning. 3, 2. I had no time to think. I cranked the wheel, swerving off the road and heading straight for the sign. The truck roared as it plowed through the dirt, bouncing violently as I tried to hold it steady. The asphalt behind me began to crumble, sinking into the blackness like a collapsing sinkhole. 1. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop just in front of the sign. The road behind me was gone, swallowed by darkness, but I was still here. I could feel the air change, like something had let go of me. The countdown had stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. I looked around expecting the worst, but all I saw was an empty stretch of desert under a sky that was finally starting to lighten. I had escaped, or so I thought. Just as I was about to exhale in relief, the radio crackled one last time. 0. Before I could react, the ground under the truck gave way. The road, the sign, the entire landscape began to twist and fold in on itself, pulling me and the truck down into a bottomless void. I screamed, but no sound came out. The truck was falling, spinning in the darkness, and all I could see were those shadowy figures, waiting for me at the bottom. As the world faded around me, one thing became painfully clear. The road wasn't just a place, it was alive. And now, I was part of it. Forever.